present.
Thanks, Mr Clark. Thank you, Chair. Mr Khalil, Deputy Chair, you had some questions?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Mr Clark. Sorry I was late, and you might have, I'm not sure if you got these questions earlier. My question's a bit more around the international relations side of things, and particularly with respect to both labour rights and human rights, not obviously being central to the RCEP, and the fact that a regime like the military junta in Myanmar has taken over in Myanmar, and Myanmar is a signatory to this agreement. But not only Myanmar, there are obviously other signatories, countries who have issues with labour rights and human rights that are also a party. What is the position of, I guess, the International Chamber of Commerce, and your position, speaking for them, with respect to those issues around human rights and labour rights?
Certainly very concerning. We're disturbed by the situation in any one of the nations you've named and a number of others that are going on at present, but we're also concerned around the concepts of weaponising trade as a solution. And the point's been made to us, you could remove all trade and conduct none, and the situation in those countries would still be exactly the same. So, you know, we'd question whether or not withdrawal of trade and other economic measures is the right way to go about making the points that you know, express our views as opposed to what's going on in those nations. So we need to be very careful around that, and we're also concerned that the prospect of withdrawing economic relations with some of them could actually make the situation worse, and we'd certainly not want to see that occur. So I think there are important issues you're raising, but we'd really rather them be outside of the relationship with any given trade agreement.
So, as a matter of principle, then, you're saying that you don't think sanctions work at all?
Not that they don't work at all, but usually trade continues on, just in different forms.
What does that mean?
Well, the nations will trade with others who are not applying the sanctions, if that's what we're doing for a start. There can be grey channels, a whole range of things. It tends to be a porous measure.
Well, in the case of Myanmar, obviously the United States and many countries, significant countries, have placed trade sanctions and withdrawn economic agreements with Myanmar as a step to make very clear that they do not accept the brutal takeover, the military junta's takeover. But you're saying you don't think Australia should be taking such action?
I think we need to be cautious around trade actions as opposed to other actions. You know, we can make the point without necessarily trade. Our trade with Myanmar is comparatively tiny, you know, in any case, so withdrawing it will make really not a lot of difference to us and probably not them either.
Well, it does make a difference because it's an example at the international level that signifies very clearly that the Australian government does not accept the military dictatorship that's taken over, nor do they accept the brutal human rights abuses and the death of civilians that's occurred. I think it's not even symbolic, it's actually a significant statement of intent. Where would you draw the red line, I guess, in a more general sense? As far as, I mean, is it a case where you would just not, does the Chamber of Commerce think that trade should continue regardless of the actions of a country? I mean, how egregious do they have to be?
Firstly, voluntary action by companies. Companies can make decisions themselves as well as consumers about whether or not they wish to purchase particular things produced in particular ways, be it you know, human rights or other abuses, be it environmental or other things. And this is one of the things which has been exercising our minds in this work we're trying to do with the WTO and the dispute process there as well. Is so you end up with everything being a trade agreement, a trade dispute. Because it seems to be the only lever around. So you have this weaponising of the trade as opposed to deal with the trade issues on one spot, deal with the environment and human and labour rights in another spot. There is the ILO, there is the UN, there's other processes rather than trade. So we're not suggesting that the government not be attentive to these things. Of course you should be. But our question is making sure we've got the right mechanism that's actually effective.
And my last question, Chair, in relation to your answers there, I assume though there would be a point at which the Australian Chamber of Commerce, the International Chamber of Commerce Australia would publicly state that an economic relationship with the country needs to cease and desist if the human rights abuses, if there were if it was Soviet Union style gulags and concentration camps, at some point you would say that we should not go ahead.
We did trade with the Soviet Union all through that period, I might point out. One of our best export markets for wheat and a number of other
It
things.
was probably a mistake, wasn't it? Let's not get into the history, but does the Chamber of Commerce have
I don't actually think there's any country with whom we've ceased.
I'm just trying to get to the
trade
bottom
embargo.
of, Chair, of the position of you're an important group, an advocacy group for trade, and we all support trade and the benefits that flow through it. But I'm just trying to get a sense that there would be a red line, though, for an organisation such as yours to say, no, actually, this is morally wrong now. We would support a government in ending an economic engagement because this is so bad.
It's a case that's not been tested internally in our organisation, and we've seen many situations like this. So, Fiji, Thailand, others. Myanmar is simply just one in a line. Regimes come and go, so we would want to see a separation between our trade interests and trade and investment interests and the other interests, and making sure we've got the appropriate measure in the appropriate house.
Thanks, Mr. Clark.